Thank you. I actually will start the lecture with showing a movie or a portrait we did of a recent project.
And other laws have no bearing laws. idea, the floating space. Data was the construction that made the strongest impression on me, the use of weight and so on, the honesty of materials and so on. I never forget this lesson I got there, just by looking at this building. Ich glaube, dass die eigentliche Baukunst darin besteht, dass da eine große Harmonie von Hauptgedanken bis zu den letzten Details sein wird. Und die Grundig macht es doch eigentlich ganz klar, deren Details waren nur Mittel zur Verdeutlichung der eigentlichen Grundidee. Die Konstruktion folgt ihrem klaren Gesetz und kann gar nicht mehr erreichen. Konstruktion zu einem Ausdruck And to do these things in a simple way. Everybody is individualist, and architecture isn't it's not an individualistic art. You know, that depends on the time, you know.
Around 4 years ago, Christiane Lange, the great-granddaughter of Hermann Lange, came to us to discuss with us the possibility of reconstructing the golf club in Krefeld. It was a project known because it was archived, but never executed. It was a project that Ludwig Mies van der Rohe did around 1930, and never executed because he left to America. There are very few elements known, very few material. It only existed in sketches, in perspectives, and different plans of different stages. So it was quite fast that we decided not to do a reconstruction, but to make a model to show the project as something unfinished and still as a sketch to show the spatial ideas and spatial qualities that the design had. It was Krefeld was actually seemed to be one of the quite important place for Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, because he designed 7 projects for in and around the city, of which the 2 houses are probably the most known. But then this project was never executed, and of course there was a kind of link with Hermann Lange. And then the question raised how to deal with this project that never came to its finalization, of which hardly few or even no facades were known, no elevations were known. There was only one section, so we had some idea of height and some idea of dimensions. We had the grid of the tiles, the concrete, well, in the model, the concrete tiles. So it came that it became this kind of model which we or architects tend to make in the phase of a project, in the different phases of a project to test things, to test the kind of spatial qualities that sketches are supposed to have. And other places were left abstract, left open, still undecided. It's a kind of three-dimensional sketch of a building. So the spaces without roofs are actually the spaces that are or for services spaces or for locker rooms or concierge. But the main focus of the model was on the, so you see that there was these spaces had some level of abstraction. We decided to make them in, we decided to make the model in plywood as a kind of idea of making a model, and whitened the wall to add an extra layer of abstraction. So and leave even construction open. The main focus, of course, was on these kind of spaces, the more prominent spaces where members of the golf club could meet and discuss and sit and watch the game over the landscape. So there was a kind of idea of how these spaces would have looked like. The columns we knew from other projects that they probably were made out of chrome, or in this case we made them of stainless steel. And one assumption we did was to make three freestanding walls in the golf club, to not whiten them, but to varnish them in a kind of clear, shiny way. As Mies did in other projects like the Tugendhat Villa and the Barcelona pavilion. He might have chosen for those walls for natural stone. Also reflecting on or referring to the idea that he might have had that primitive cultures use cloth and textile as a kind of welcome signs. So our idea of these walls was that they blocked actually the landscape, and they were in this way positioned that they show the kind of sequence of landscapes. The way you walk through the pavilion was actually kind of sequence of blocking landscape with these freestanding plywood walls, then opening to first on the left-hand side and on the right-hand side landscape, and actually framing this landscape. This is the area of our own office, the place where we work and live. It's in Ghent, It's a very social neighborhood with very small houses, and where there used to be very large textile factories next to it. And within this area, we had the opportunity, and we're still quite happy of it, to buy this wood storage hall, what that was built in the 70s. And was mainly a very large hall, open air, and with no services or supplies of any kind. And we made in the hall a kind of new landscape, a series of gardens that start here and continue along the edge with a kind of secret garden, a pool garden, ending in a courtyard. With the actual offices on the side, these are the working spaces of all the collaborators, and under the first floor are the ground floor are the meeting rooms, refectory, and kind of model making spaces. But all of this overlooking the central space as a kind of space where nothing happens, where there's only a landscape of trees and green and this kind of elements. So this is the final garden where we eat and sit during summer. We use the central hall sometimes for our children to play, but also for inviting artists to have a kind of installation. This is the upper floor where our collaborators work. In the kind of library-like cabinets. We changed the roof lights. So one of the elements with what we work a lot is the roof and the way we treat in it. We like to think about it as the only space where we can intervene as architects, where we can decide for ourselves what to do. As all the other elements of architecture have to be for the comfort of those who will use it. This is the lower corridor. In Antwerp, we were the Middelheim Museum is a very large open-air sculpture park near Antwerp, on the boundaries of Antwerp. And about 2 years ago, it was able to do a large extension by the Hortiflora, kind of more formal garden that was at that time property of the city, and they handed it over to the museum. And we were asked to position there a pavilion able to show very fragile and very small work, sculptures that could resist climatological circumstances as snow, rain, cold, heat, but had to be handled with care and had to be locked during night. So we were asked to think of a pavilion in this area. It was also a moment that we could think of using. We have a kind of metric system in our office. It's called the Louis, and it's based on the numbers 3, 5, and 7, and all the permutations between those numbers. So the pavilion became this kind of exercise in how to use these numbers and how to make space with it. The result of the numbers, if you result 3 by 5 by 7, you get 105, which is a kind of our opposition to the meter, the 100 centimeter meter. So we use this kind of element quite a lot. These are some drawings of how we would read this space of a rectangular circumscribed rectangular of a large space, but where the entrances, the different entrances, 4 of them, make smaller spaces, and actually try to have a kind of roof that unifies the whole of them. These are some sketches or diagrams how we would interpret these spaces. And the roof is kind of tent-like roof, also referring to the idea that of kind of cloth. The pavilion is made out of steel, very thin steel, 6 millimeters, attached to also very thin columns of 6 millimeters. And this kind of idea of a cloth and using beams and columns to strengthen it and to secure it, as if it was textile, if it was building a tent-like structure, to a kind of woven structure of steel. The first exhibition, we asked Thomas Schutt, to have his collection of ceramics. It's kind of very small sculptures of hats and vases and so on to be shown in the pavilion. Also, the pavilion had 2 small patios with trees standing in to have this kind of relation between inside and outside. That was never quite, and still is not quite clear how to see it. The pavilion actually is also kind of passage of the different paths going through, and the different entrances connecting these paths and walk-throughs. This is during winter time. The market hall and Centrum Squares. is in Ghent. Is also a project in Ghent, in the center of Ghent. The center of Ghent is very much identified by 3 towers, 3 historical buildings, the St. Nicholas Church, the Belfry, and the cathedral. And in between, there was a vacant site during many years after demolition campaigns in the beginning of the 20th century and during the 60s to this idea to free monuments, to have them again, not again actually, but to have them in a kind of solitary position. It was the beginning of the 20th century. There was the World Expo, and it was one of these elements they wanted to show. But in the reality was actually that these buildings always had, and the vacant space that I showed earlier, always had houses and shops next to it and attached to it. So it became this unorganized open space in the center of Ghent, and in the 80s, and it was even a parking space for cars, and very unrespectful for the city center of Ghent. This is, as you can see, a picture of before and after the demolition campaigns. So it was very dense, and it was never seen that the 3 monuments could have seen together. So our solution or our answer to this process was to add again a volume in this open space that would reform and would bring back historic urban spaces as small squares which were there, and also there's this idea of blocking again and opening up again view lines and sides to the historic buildings. It was not the intention to completely rebuild the building block in between. Therefore, we added a new green in between, a very small park. A kind of roof on heavy columns. A roof made out of 2 parts, that are similar with each other, and that also refer to historic buildings as the city hall close by. This kind of idea of changing proportions. But also having these references to common knowledge or elements that we all have seen, and that try to combine these images into this architectural object of, for instance, here 2 graves of queen and king, or the fresco with the opening up of the tent. So the result was a kind of urban interior where different things could happen, but also nothing could happen, and which was okay and still is okay. So it's an unprogrammed space which tries to celebrate the passage of people going under and experience this idea of space. The roof has this kind of few thousand skylights that during the day let light enter, and during the night the inverse happens. But it becomes a space where people walk and sit and listen to music and sit and the site had this kind of natural slope. There was a natural difference in height between one part of the site and the lower part. So we were able to bring under this construction a restaurant, a brasserie, as the only function, and which is related more to the green than to the market hall. So this is the evening view of the building, which is erected in wood. We wanted to make a building knowing this the surroundings of these several UNESCO protected buildings as the City Hall and the different towers of Ghent, to have a material that is in the hierarchy of materials a lesser material, wood, in contrast to the natural stone of the towers and the historic buildings. So we had to show some humbleness, to show some respect, but covered with a kind of glaze, scaly cloth that also shows a different, that allows us to show the building in different ways, reflecting light, very much see-through, or so the building gets different aspects by showing these, by using this glass. It's used for different occasions, for markets, for people eating, having children playing. So it's very much already used by the people of Ghent as this kind of social element where things can happen, and can happen very loosely without any kind of restrictions. So you see here the glazy effect of the building, with the green again as a kind of social place and a place where people can rest. Something that is quite new in the center of Ghent, since it was for many years parking space. At the sea, at the coast of Belgium, the coast of Belgium is a very straight line. It's fully built with apartment buildings close to the beach, forming a kind of wall from the one end of the sea, from the border to the other end. But at certain points, some accidents happen, and one of these accidents is a triangular square in Knokke. Where we were asked to make the square above a lot of parking spaces that were newly built. And of course, the next image is Seurat, Baignade Asnières. It's a painting we often use in the office as a kind of reference to pose, to how to the autonomy of pose, or of how people are seeking the kind of comfort. But it's also this kind of painting related to free time, to modernization. So we use this painting in the back of our heads while working on this project, to come to make a space where with kind of texture of related to pointillisme, but also to the sea, and where we wanted to add a serious or an important artistic integration by Franz West, the Austrian artist, who proposed this kind of Lemuren, this kind of ghosts, sea ghosts, conversating with each other and with the sea. It's also the places where people come out of the parking space to the ground level. It's a place where children play, where due to a natural, very small slope that's in the terrain, and they use it to ride faster, but also to almost vandalize the square. They tend to bump into the socle, into the plinths of the sculptures, and we added next to this space for children long benches, long screens, and this idea of people resting, people watching, trying to find comfort zones. Also, our belief in long benches as the ability of people sitting next to each other, something that hardly happens when you have short benches. But this kind of social meetings, places along these benches. Last project is in the north of Brussels. It's the landscape of where Bruegel made a lot of paintings. It's slightly hilly. And we were asked to make a dairy, to convert a dairy into a place for where musicians could exercise before they had to enter the Belgium important Elizabeth competition for violin or piano or singing. So it's kind of chamber music hall within this landscape, formed as a small ziggurat, a kind of spiral going upwards and overlooking the endlessness of the landscape. So this is kind of a painting by Bruegel showing this landscape during wintertime. And this, I will show you as a last element a movie. Thank you.
Especially that the use of this metrical system of 3, 5, and 7 meters. I'm just wondering.
It's not 3, 5, and 7 meters. It's the number 3 and the number 5 and the number 7, which results in numbers like 3 multiplied by 5 is 15. So we can use 15, but we cannot use 16 because we'll not get to 16 by multiplying. So we have this kind of range of numbers we use, 3, 5, 7, 9, total darkness, and so on. And those numbers we use as a kind of help in deciding which number we use actually. Then.
It's not based on something like a human heart or something.
No, but it seems that some of these numbers, like 81 and 105, and there are several others, are practical to use. Like a chair is 45 centimeters, so that exists in this metrical system.
Golf club, is it still?
It's demolished. It's really not there anymore.
Was that always part of the plan? Or?
Yes, absolutely. It was. The site is protected, so it's not allowed to do any kind of constructions there, and it was only allowed because of its temporality of the building. So I think it has been demolished last November. So the only things that still exist now are columns that are spread over people paying for them, and the plywood is being used by students of universities in the area to do some things with this, but it's not there anymore.
In the film, it felt like it was the local community or whatever who came and. Or interested architects, I don't know, who came and looked at the thing. What was the sort of, it felt like it was an installation that somehow was trying to do something with the community. Was there a sense of that?
Well, in the beginning, people were very much opposed, or certain people were very much opposed to the idea of having a kind of a model on that place, and were not so much attracted by it. But in the end of the, I think, 6 months or maybe a bit more, indeed it was this kind of element where the people of Krefeld were quite proud of and asking if it could stay. And but in a way, it's good that it has been demolished. It was a kind of opportunity for us to have something that was in the mind of Mies van Rohe, that we had to try to understand and have to be a bit in our mind. And now, then it was there. It was really touchable, and now it's again in each one's mind. So it's good that it's now that it was this kind of research element, and it was this kind of installation where we learned a lot of. Not only the architecture of Mies, but also on space, or how to treat, or how to work with material. And now it's gone. It's kind of this. I think there was a newspaper in Germany who called it this kind of Fata Morgana, and that's good.
It strikes me that the rest of your work is not very Miesian. if you like.
No.
Why did they come to you? What was the link?
Well, you're not the first one to ask, so maybe that's the reason. So maybe that's the reason, because they asked us, that we had the kind of distance. Well, we have a lot of respect for it, but we had a kind of distance with our architecture of Mies. So we were able to work quite freely with it, not too much with the constraint or with kind of the brakes on or whatever. But the other, so that's an element, but probably the other more simple element is that we had worked for Christiane Lange, who was a curator. We had worked before this pavilion on an exhibition for her. She did an exhibition in Haus Lange on the furniture of Mies van Roo and Lily Reich, and for which we did the scenography. So she came back to us, and that's how things happen.
You sort of fall in love with the Miesian approach in any way? I mean, it felt like you were certainly dwelling on it in the film. Sort of.
Well, fall in love. Well, there's always a lot of respect for the Miesian architecture, of course. So, as I said, I think there was a journalist who came to us, and he showed us the. I don't know if you know, but we did in. And I was still young, but the office did the hour pavilions for the Documenta in Kassel, and he explained to us that in a way this is a kind of similar approach towards landscape than what you showed in the pavilion, the Mies pavilion. So that it was interesting that, yes, of course we're not Miesian, but maybe it already is still a bit in us, and it's something that is there. That's something that we know and is unconsciously kind of part of how we work. But in the same way, there are a lot of other architects and elements and references that are part of of our thinking and how we work. So I would not say that we are only this architect or only that architect. Or I think there's a lot of maybe that's what you can see is that we have a lot of common with paintings. We learn a lot of paintings and how to use these elements such as color or landscape or kind of idea of ensemble, which was in the Seurat painting. So I think that are elements that we often use as references in discussions within the office, more than architecture.
What was the reference you had in mind when you decided to, or you and your partner decided to create the working spaces in your office with such a low ceiling and with such a,
But it was there. The ceiling height was decided. There was nothing. So this.
You could have constructed in the middle or wherever. You decided to go.
Yes, but well, at the moment that we bought the office, I think 2006, or it's kind of a process that goes on. We at the same time we are constructing the market hall in Ghent, so this is kind of roof without program. And it's true that the first sketches of our office were using the main hall as office space or meeting space or whatever. But then this kind of process evolves, and then you realize that it's actually interesting to have this kind of amount of space that you don't use, that you only use for the benefit of having space, of overlooking it, and to have this kind of free element. So it's really about kind of a panorama, or kind of have this kind of landscape towards you're looking at. So I think in the end that was what we wanted. And reference, we were always interested in roofs and ceilings, and in how we can treat them. So this is one of the elements that it's kind of space with a roof, and we like roofs.
House in Ghent, or you said the volume that you create there. I understand the urbanistic thoughts, backgrounds behind it, but you have like an open space right next to it, and then you have this roof covering another space. What exactly is going on in there? I mean, you have, maybe I didn't just get it. What's the purpose of?
You mean the market hall in Ghent? Mm-hmm. So the purpose is, if you would look to the historic maps, is that there were building blocks between the historic monuments. So there was this kind of filled space with volumes. And then in '96, there was this competition. This is the first competition asking to have a square with underneath parking lot, and already then we decided to have to build this volume to recreate the urbanistic open air spaces, let's say the small squares are next to it, by adding a volume, by adding this this roof. In '96 it had a completely different material, and it was so it was really about recreating the historic open air spaces around that site. It was not possible to bring back the complete building block and neglect the question of a square. And it raised a lot of questions after the competition, because there was no volume asked. So there was no program asked. The only program that was asked was a square and a parking space underneath. And then it was really a kind of social activism that decided that the parking space could not find its place between these in this historic center of Ghent. And I think in the beginning of the around 2000, there was a second competition where we again proposed to build the market hall, because we were convinced of this idea that it's not a square you need, it's really recreating historic space. And then it became this kind of roof-like building, or this kind of having, but its main purpose, the recreation of the urban space, but its benefit that it could be kind of open air market hall, as you have also in France or in other countries, to have things happening. But at the same time, we say yes, but it doesn't need to be always programmed. It can be nothing. It can be really about space.
It's very nice to have an open volume like that, where you have market squares temporarily, and then sometimes you have nothing. I mean, quite luxurious, I think.
Yeah, it's probably, but but it's quite luxurious in the sense that it's also it was quite needed also to bring back a kind of scale to the space. So we believe that it's not only you do not only need this kind of programmed space to be serving people, can also by giving them something that they learn to value after a time. So, and that's also what's happening, because I have to admit that the project had a lot of raised a lot of questions, and maybe the same as yours. It's quite luxury, and do we need it, and what can happen in this kind of roof, and so on. So we were. It's also the first building we have that maybe the only one we will ever have, but that had a kind of manifestations going under the building then. So that can happen too there. So, but the same questions were raised by the people. But now, after I think 1 year or 2 years, you see that they love it, the space. They see that it's something they didn't have in Ghent, and they use it in different ways. So this kind of luxuriousness becomes something normal.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just